I don't know when I started feeling like something wasn't right about that trip, but I'm sure it didn't start when we first heard that sound, but hours before it. When I trace my memory back to that day, I find dozens of small details that all of us ignored because they seemed normal at the time. Maybe that's why we didn't leave early. And maybe that's also why not everyone who enters that forest comes out of it the way they entered. Even now, whenever someone asks me about the worst night I've lived through in my life, I don't talk about the terror I saw, but I talk about the feeling that preceded its appearance, that strange sensation that the place itself doesn't want you to stay, as if it's watching you silently, waiting for the moment you make your first mistake. 3 weeks ago, my two friends, Jason and Noah, and I decided to spend the weekend in one of the dense forests located inside Washington State. We didn't choose the place randomly, as it was famous among camping enthusiasts because of its quietness and distance from main roads. We had read dozens of reviews on travel sites, and all of them talked about the giant trees and cold streams, and the sky that fills with stars at night. There was no official warning and no scary story that pushed us to hesitate. We packed our gear and set off before sunrise. We were talking all the way about fishing and barbecuing, and about our phones that would finally stop receiving notifications. Everything felt completely normal, to the point that I now feel strange whenever I remember how reassured we were. We arrived at the parking lot near the trailhead around 10 in the morning, that it was only an old car covered in mud, and a 60-year-old man sitting on a wooden bench in front of a large board carrying the map of the forest. He cast a quick glance at us, then went back to staring at the trees without uttering a word. After we carried our bags, he approached us and asked where we were heading. Jason told him the name of the area we chose to pitch the tents. His features changed for a short moment, then he said quietly, "If you guys stay late until night, don't leave the camp, no matter what you hear." Noah laughed, thinking it was a usual joke to scare beginners, but the man didn't smile. He kept looking at us for moments, then added, "At night, sounds travel between the trees in a strange way. Sometimes you hear someone you know calling you from afar, even if he's sitting right next to you. Don't follow any sound coming from inside the forest." We thanked him and left, but I turned back to him after a few steps and found him still looking in our direction with the same blank stare, as if he wanted to say something else, then backed out at the last moment. The walk to the campsite took about 2 hours. The trail was clear and the air was cold, and the smell of pine filled the place. Everything was beautiful, in a way that's hard to describe. Yet I began noticing something no one paid attention to. Ever since we entered deep into the forest, I didn't hear a single bird sound. It wasn't just that bird sounds were few, but there were no natural sounds at all. No chirping or rustling of wings, not even the sound of a squirrel jumping between branches. I asked Jason if he had noticed that, and he replied while continuing to walk, "Maybe it's still early." I convinced myself with his words, but the feeling of unease stayed with me. After we pitched the tents, Noah went out to gather firewood, and Jason started preparing the cooking gear. As for me, I went to the small stream to fill the water bottles, and while I was bending over, I clearly heard the sound of footsteps over dry leaves behind me. I turned around immediately, expecting it to be one of them, but the place was completely empty. I kept staring between the trees for several seconds, then told myself maybe it's a deer or a small animal, and while I was getting ready to head back, I caught sight of something that made me stop in my tracks. There were footprints in the wet mud on the opposite bank of the stream. At first they looked normal, but after a few moments they caught my attention. They were barefoot footprints, and noticeably large. And the weirdest thing was that they came out of the water and headed toward the forest. And there were no traces indicating that their owner had even entered the water. I kept looking at them, trying to find a logical explanation, but I found none. At that exact moment, I heard Jason's voice calling me from the camp, asking for help to start the fire. I turned toward him for a single second, then returned my eyes to the spot of the tracks. But they had completely disappeared, as if the mud had swallowed them right before my eyes. I returned to the camp, trying to convince myself that what I saw was an optical illusion. I kept repeating in my head that wet mud can change its shape, and fatigue makes a person notice things that aren't there. I didn't tell Jason or Noah what happened because I knew exactly what their reaction would be. Jason would look for a logical explanation in everything, while Noah wouldn't miss a chance to mock me throughout the trip. Therefore, I preferred to stay quiet and convince myself that if I ignored the matter, I would forget it within hours. But some things don't disappear when you ignore them. They start approaching you quietly. As the sun set, the temperature dropped quickly. We lit the fire and prepared dinner, and sat exchanging talk about our previous trips. The flames were dancing in front of us, and the huge trees surrounded the camp from every direction, until it seemed as if we were inside a closed circle where you couldn't see what's behind it. At one point, our conversation stopped all at once. No one spoke, and we didn't hear an obvious reason for that. But we all felt one thing: an unnatural quietness. It wasn't the usual quietness of the night, but it was a complete void of sounds. Even the fire that was burning in front of us seemed as if its sound became lighter than usual. Jason looked around and then said in a low voice, "Have you guys noticed that the forest has been silent ever since we arrived?" And before anyone could answer, a whistling sound went off from a distant spot between the trees. It was a very short tune, not exceeding 3 notes, but it was clear in a way that made us all look in the same direction. It wasn't a bird sound, and it didn't sound like the wind. It was closer to someone whistling with his mouth. Noah said while smiling a nervous smile, "Maybe there's another camp nearby." Jason nodded his head but didn't look convinced. About a minute passed and the whistling repeated. The exact same tune, but this time it sounded closer. Jason stood up and grabbed the flashlight and shined it between the trees. Nothing appeared. The trees were so close together that the light only penetrated for a few meters. Then the darkness swallowed it. He came back and sat down, but no one resumed the conversation anymore. We were just listening. In less than 5 minutes, we heard something else. Slow and heavy footsteps, walking over dry leaves. They were coming from the northern side of the camp, then suddenly stopped. We all looked at the same spot and none of us moved. Several seconds of silence continued before the sound started again, but this time from the exact opposite side, as if whoever was making it managed to circle around us within moments. Noah said, trying to sound calm, "It might be a bear." Jason replied immediately, "Bears don't move this way." I didn't like the way he replied, because he said it with the confidence of someone who knows that the explanation his friend gave is impossible. We decided to put out part of the fire and get ready to sleep, hoping that everything we heard were just natural sounds magnified by isolation. Each one of us entered his tent, but sleep didn't come easily. I don't know how much time passed, maybe an hour or more. Then I woke up to a very faint sound. At first I thought it was a dream, but the sound repeated. This time it was clear. Someone walking slowly around the tents. A step, then 2 steps, then stops. After which he continues walking. I grabbed my phone, which had no network signal. I looked at the time and found it 2:18 a.m. I stuck my head out of the tent opening slowly. No one was there. The fire had turned into faint red embers, and the fog had started covering the ground up to knee height. And while I was watching the place, I heard a whisper that was very close. Daniel. The blood froze in my veins. That's my name. The voice was low but clear, as if someone was standing just a meter away from my tent. I got out quickly while turning on the flashlight. I called out, "Jason?" No one answered me. I opened Jason's tent and found him sitting inside holding the flashlight, and his face was pale in a way I hadn't seen him before. He looked at me and said before I could utter a word, "You heard it too?" I didn't answer. We just sufficed with looking at each other. At that moment, Noah came out of his tent and was breathing quickly. He said in a trembling voice, "Which one of you guys was calling me a moment ago?" I said immediately, "We haven't left our tents for a single second." He shook his head slowly and then said a sentence I haven't forgotten to this day. He said, "Who was standing between the trees calling me in your voice?" We didn't all turn in the direction he pointed to, because at that exact moment we heard the sound again. It was pronouncing my name, but this time it wasn't coming from between the trees, but it was coming from directly behind my tent. None of us looked back when we heard the whisper coming from behind my tent. Fear had surpassed the stage of curiosity and turned into the instinctual feeling that tells you survival is more important than knowing what's happening. Jason turned on the flashlight and Noah grabbed the car keys, and we started packing our things with unprecedented speed. We didn't think about the food or the gear we paid for, nor even about putting out the fire. All we wanted was to get back to the car before the situation got worse. But when we reached the beginning of the trail we entered from during the day, we discovered something that confused us more than any sound we heard. The red ribbon we had tied to one of the trees to mark the trail had completely disappeared, as if someone had carefully removed it. Jason tried to rely on the Maps app on his phone, but the signal was non-existent, and the digital compass started spinning in all directions without settling. For the first time since the beginning of the trip, I saw real anxiety on his face. He said quietly, trying to hide his tension with it, "We'll wait until dawn breaks." But none of us was convinced that waiting would be a good idea. We sat close together around what remained of the fire, and our eyes were moving constantly between the trees. Long minutes passed in which nothing happened, until we heard a distant sound resembling the slamming of a car door. Noah stood up immediately and said the road was close, and there were other people in the forest. We tried to stop him, but he was convinced that rescue was just meters away. He ran in the direction of the sound before we could catch up to him, then disappeared between the dense trees. No more than half a minute passed until we heard him scream a short and sharp scream. Then silence fell again. We ran behind him with all our might, but we found only his flashlight thrown on the ground still lit, and clear slipping tracks on the wet soil ending at a group of bushes. We called his name dozens of times and searched in all directions, but there was no reply. We didn't find blood or additional footprints, and we didn't find any evidence explaining how an adult man disappeared in less than a minute. That's when we made the hardest decision of our lives, to leave immediately and ask for help, because staying wouldn't save him, but might make us disappear like him. With the very first thread of dawn light, we were finally able to find the path leading to the parking lot. Our car was in its place just as we left it, but the old car we saw yesterday morning was no longer there. We drove the car directly to the nearest police station and reported Noah missing. Search teams started hours later and lasted 3 full days with the participation of trained dogs and drones. But the result was shocking. They didn't find any trace of him, and didn't even find the flashlight we left at the spot of his disappearance. After weeks, the case was closed as a missing person case in a mountainous area, and investigators suggested he might have lost his way and had an accident in a place search teams couldn't reach. I tried to convince myself of this explanation, but there was one thing that kept haunting me to this day. Months after the incident, I was reviewing the photos we took at the beginning of the trip before dark set in. In one of the photos, the 3 of us were standing in front of the tent, smiling at the camera. I didn't notice it until after zooming in on the photo several times. Between the trees and at a very far distance, a person was standing looking at us. He wasn't close enough to see his features, but he was clearly there. I showed the photo to the responsible investigator, and he said the shadow might be another hiker or an optical illusion due to the lighting. Maybe he was right. Maybe there was a simple explanation for everything that happened. But ever since that night, I no longer go to any forest. And I don't ignore that mysterious feeling that sometimes tells a human being that the place he is standing in is not safe. Some people consider this just fear, while I consider it the only reason that made me return to my home, while Noah never came back.